She is on the front line, taking and evaluating complaints, conducting the field investigations and interviews, and furthermore, prosecuting the violations of unlicensed activity, seeing that through to the settlement and recommended order process. So really great information. I'm so excited to introduce. Please join me in welcoming Esther Brown.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Shayla, for that introduction. I do need to make a correction, however. I am actually Rico's Complaints and Enforcement Officer, so I'm actually the head of the agency. And so I work closely with our Consumer Resource Center, as well as the other sections within Rico. Thank you so much, members of REBI, for having me here this morning. I'm so happy that all of you are interested in knowing a little bit more about Rico. And so I hope to provide you with lots of good information in the next 40 minutes or so. And if there is time remaining, if you would be so kind as to type any questions that you may have in the chat box, then I'll try to get to those questions as well. First and foremost, most of you probably know that Rico is a state agency and we are part of the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs. We are statewide in that we have offices on the island of Oahu, as well as 2 offices on the Big Island, another office in Maui, and another office on Kauai. All told, we have about 67 positions and excellent workers doing our job. And our job as a state agency is to enforce the professional and vocational licensing laws. And we do so by receiving and reviewing individually filed complaints. And the complaints that we receive are against licensees who people feel may be doing something wrong or committing some level of misconduct, as well as complaints from members of the public who know of people or suspect that there are people out there that are performing work for which a license is required. And those types of complaints are unlicensed activity complaints. The scope of Rico's jurisdiction is extremely broad. We currently have over 4,000 statutes and rules that fall within our jurisdiction. So we are very, very busy getting acquainted with most of them. We also touch upon 52 different industries within our state. So for example, we touch upon the real estate industry because we do have jurisdiction over brokers and salespersons, as well as brokerage firms. We also have jurisdiction over real estate schools. We touch upon the healthcare industry in our state because we do have jurisdiction over physicians, nurses, physical therapists, dentists, chiropractors, physical therapists, and so forth. We touch upon the travel industry as well, in that we have jurisdiction over travel agents, as well as activity desk providers. We certainly touch the building industry in our state because we have a lot of complaints in that area. And so we do regulate contractors, plumbers, engineers, land surveyors, elevator mechanics, just to name a few. We even touch upon the automobile industry. So we do handle complaints involving car dealers, as well as car salespersons and automobile repair shops. We touch upon the beauty industry or the personal services industry. So barbers, cosmetologists, beauty shops. We also have regulatory authority over massage therapists. We also touch upon industries where we don't receive a lot of complaints of every year, such as the fighting industry. So we do have our hands in mixed martial arts events as well as boxing events. And we also touch upon the navigable waters industry. This is an area where we rarely get complaints, and the licensees that we have jurisdiction over are port pilots. And we have gotten complaints against port pilots in the past. But that was just sort of to give each of you an idea of the scope of what it is that this agency does and the amount of work that we have every year, because we really do touch upon almost every area in our state and in many communities. We have a very large workload because, as you can imagine, there are a lot of people out there dealing with professionals and vocationals and trade persons every single day of their life. And when they're unhappy, they end up filing a complaint with our office. And so we do have a lot of complaints that we turn over every single year. So as a result of that, one of the tools that we like to use to help us in the area of enforcement is education. It is actually quite effective. And so we do spend quite a bit of our time getting out into the public, appearing in front of organizations such as yourself and other licensee organizations. We go to civic events, we go to trade shows, and we even go to community groups that may have an interest in hearing from Rico. We weren't out in the community as much during the pandemic, but we hope to get back into the community moving forward. One of the other tools that we use in order to help educate both licensees and consumers is our website. And so I would encourage each of you to visit our website because there is a plethora of information on it that can help both you as a licensee to remain in compliant with the licensing laws. But most of the information is geared towards consumers of services. We have brochures that can be downloaded for free. We also have a service called Rico's Complaints Filing Portal, and it's a very handy service. What you can do is just punch in the name of either a person or a company that you are thinking of doing business with. And what that portal will do is it'll pull up the complaints history of that particular individual or company if there is one. And the history that it pulls up is fairly recent history. So for example, if you're thinking of using a real estate salesperson as your agent in listing your home and you wanted to know whether or not there's been a complaint against that person with Rico or whether or not that person has been disciplined by the real estate commission, then you should feel free to use the portal and enter their name. And like I said, anything recent that we have on file related to that person will appear, including Rico complaints that are still pending and have not been resolved. So through our website, through community interaction, through our complaints filing portal, and also through our everyday processing of Rico complaints. We use education a lot to help people be aware of the laws and staying compliant with the laws. And an example of that in the complaints processing process is that many of our complaints that we receive will not result in formal enforcement action for a variety of reasons. But we often take administrative action on some of these matters. And by that, I mean, we do issue to licensees and unlicensed persons in certain circumstances education contacts or warning letters. And these usually result in many cases where there really isn't strong bad intent, or there was an honest mistake, or the person really didn't understand what the law was. There's no consumer harm. It's just one of these things that happen, an honest mistake or corrective action has been taken and the licensee now understands sort of the nuances of the laws. So in many of the complaints that we receive, they are resolved administratively through an education contact or a warning. And those documents are meant to assist the licensee or the person with further compliance with the law. And I'm proud to say that in my tenure here with Rico, which has been for over a decade, it is extremely rare that we will see someone again who has been the recipient of an education contact or warning letter. And so that makes me conclude that licensees who receive that really take the information to heart and just continue to comply with the law and be the awesome professional that we know them to be. How does Rico do its work? Well, we have three main working groups within the organization. And the first one is the Consumer Resource Center. And yes, the Consumer Resource Center is our front line, and they intake all of the information that comes to our agency every year. The second working group is our field investigation section, and they are like detectives in that they delve into a matter in depth, and they do more sophisticated investigations that may lead to a conclusion that a licensing law has been violated. And then the third working group in Rico is our legal section, and it consists of attorneys and support staff. The Consumer Resource Center is our intake working group, and we get information from a variety of ways every single year. We get complaints that are filed electronically. We get information that's mailed to us through the mail. We have information and complaints that come in through email. And we also have consumers and members of the public that actually come to our office and visit and talk story and drop off a complaint as well. All of these forms of communications are intaked and handled by an investigator in our Consumer Resource Center. And the role of that investigator is to assist consumers and members of the public with completing a complaint, gathering the basic information that we may need in order to evaluate the complaint. They determine whether or not a complaint is something that falls within Rico's jurisdiction, and many of them do not. And so the Consumer Resource Center investigator can also help in trying to find some institution or organization or agency that's better suited to handle the dispute than Rico. Say, for example, someone is filing a sort of a harassment or discrimination type of complaint. Typically, in matters like that, we would take a back seat and probably refer that matter over to the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission, since that is their expertise and kuleana. And so the Consumer Resource Center employees are extremely competent in what they do. They are good people, persons. They can answer questions. They will point people in the right direction. And they also do a lot of work in screening complaints just to assure that the complaints are properly before this agency. All told, they get an excess of 7,000 plus complaints and inquiries almost every year. A large majority of those will end in the Consumer Resource Center, but typically between 2,500 and 3,000 complaints every year go forward towards the investigations process. So that's a lot of work every single year that comes through the agency. If the intake investigator in the Consumer Resource Center believes that there's enough information with a complaint that could implicate a potential licensing law, then they often refer that matter to the field section. And when it goes to the field section, the complaint will be assigned to an investigator. The investigators in the field section have more depth and experience, and they have been doing regulatory investigations for many, many years. They are familiar with the licensing laws. They are familiar with the evidence or fact gathering process. They are familiar with weighing the evidence and judging the credibility of the evidence. So when a case is assigned to a field investigator, you can rest assured that you have competent people who are looking into the matters that have been alleged by a complainant. Some of the investigations that are conducted by our field investigators can be quite simple because the issue in the case may be quite basic. And so their investigation may just consist of a question and answer form that's sent out to the licensee for a response. But the majority of investigations that are conducted by our investigators in the field section are much more complex. They will often involve communicating directly with the complainant and the respondent. They may involve a personal interview of both of the parties. They may involve contacting and interviewing other people that may have relevant knowledge. Their investigations may involve obtaining, gathering, digesting, and analyzing a lot of tangible information, such as documents, text messages, recordings, videos, photographs, and so forth. They may also reach out to third-party organizations and subpoena them for records if the information would be germane to the case. And another thing that the field investigators do quite regularly when they encounter issues in a case that they need a little bit more help or expertise on is they can consult with industry experts. And so Regal does have professionals such as real estate brokers and salespeople that we call upon when we run into a novel issue and we really need an industry expert's opinion on whether or not, the conduct of the licensee sort of met industry standards or not. And so Rico investigators will spend quite a bit of time working with industry experts if that's necessary. If the field investigator, after conducting an investigation and reviewing all of the information, determines that there just isn't enough there for licensing law violation, then they can close the case. They can also issue an administrative letter, such as an education contact or a warning. If they do conclude that all of the evidence being evaluated and weighed against the law, it does look like there's a probable licensing law violation, then what the field investigator will do is they will refer the matter to the legal section. And when the case is assigned to the legal section, it will be forwarded to an attorney who will handle the case. And the attorney then will do another review of the entire matter. The attorney will look at the law, will look at the facts, will look at the evidence that's been gathered, will weigh the credibility of all of the individuals involved in the case, and will make a determination about whether or not we have enough there for a successful prosecution. In other words, the factual evidence is good and credible. The law is on our side. We feel that if this leads to a contested case, we will prevail. If we meet all three of those standards, then the assigned attorney will work to resolve the case. And many, many times the cases are resolved through a settlement agreement. But there are occasions when these cases do go to a hearing, in which case Rico becomes the formal prosecutor, and we prosecute the case in front of a hearings officer. And the result of that is a recommended decision. And that decision will go to the Real Estate Commission. And the Real Estate Commission can either adopt or reject the decision. And 99.9% of the time, the Real Estate Commission adopts the recommended decision by a hearings officer. Many, many complaints will end in the legal section without formal enforcement action or disciplinary action against licensees. And the reason for that is because we can't go forward unless we have really good and reliable evidence to prove up the charges. So many, many cases do close in the legal section for insufficient evidence, meaning there just wasn't enough to meet the legal standard we are required to meet in order to impose disciplinary action. I'd like to share two reality checks with you when it comes to Rico's work. And the first is that it can take a while to process a complaint. Because we get thousands of complaints and inquiries every year. We typically take in between 2,500 and 3,000 new complaints every year, and we still have many complaints in process. The workload is quite heavy, and so it can take a while for a complaint to reach its conclusion. And we realize that is of small comfort to a complainant who feels aggrieved, and to a licensee who's the subject matter of a complaint and wants to get it over and done with. But in all fairness to everyone, to the licensees and to the public, it does take a while, and we do try our best, to move them along quickly, but we do want to do a thorough job just to make sure that the decisions that we reach in each case is justifiable and fair. Because we receive so many complaints, most of them are handled in the order that they are received. So, if your complaints come to Rico in 2022 and an investigator has complaints still pending from 2021, then it may be a while before the investigator is able to get to your case. However, our investigators are very good at providing you with updates. So if you are the complainant or you are the respondent, you can feel free to communicate with the investigator and even the attorney if the case gets that far, as far as the status of what's happening with the matter that's affecting you. Sometimes complaints can take a while because we do prioritize certain types of complaints, and they will leapfrog over anything else that we have in inventory. And a couple of examples of these high priority complaints are those that have serious bodily harm, such as allegations of sexual assault or physical mistreatment of a client or a patient or a customer by a licensee, cases that involve sort of ongoing fraud that's provable, that's affecting more than one person and has or is or will result in significant financial losses Those types of cases we put on the front burner, and we try our best to do a thorough and complete investigation as soon as possible so that we can help to mitigate any more harm to consumers that are out there. And the last reality check that I'd like to share with you is that, again, many complaints end at Rico for insufficient evidence, meaning there's not enough evidence, good evidence, to meet the legal standard we need to meet in order to impose disciplinary action. What that doesn't mean is it doesn't mean that the underlying licensee or the underlying unlicensed person did not commit a wrongdoing. So it's not a vindication of the person who is the subject of a RICO complaint. All it means is that we really can't meet our burden of proof in the hearings process, and so we don't have the goods to prosecute. That also means that we strongly encourage and notify complainants when they file a RICO complaint and through the investigations process that if they feel truly aggrieved, if they feel damages are owed to them, if they want immediate redress, that they really should explore other options for resolving their dispute. And if they feel strongly about it, perhaps consult an attorney to see what their rights are. Because again, RICO is responsible for enforcing the licensing laws. And there may be many other laws out there in the civil arena that may address the issue, but RICO does not have any kuleana over that. And we also do not want parties to blow the statute of limitations in a civil proceeding. So we are very, very careful to let complainants know, especially that we do not represent them personally. And if they have a personal grievance that they want to take up, then they may want to explore their own options and not wait for RICO to do anything. I'd like to, in the next couple of minutes, share a couple of trends with you that we have noticed in the real estate industry here at Rico. And some of these you are probably aware of if you do receive and read the quarterly real estate bulletins that are published by the Real Estate Commission. And so, as you know, one of the first trends that's pretty evident is that licensees, real estate licensees that are convicted of driving under the influence, that is an area that the Real Estate Commission feels strongly about. And so if you have committed a DUI, there is a very strong chance that disciplinary action will be imposed by the commission. There have been a few cases in the last decade or so that have involved personal transactions by real estate licensees. And so I'd just like to inform you, if you do not know, that there is a law on the book that makes the personal real estate transactions of a licensee subject to the jurisdiction of the Real Estate Commission. So for example, if you happen to own a house that you're renting to someone, and the tenant, for example, complains about something and files a RICO complaint, we do have jurisdiction to look at that. And if there is any wrongdoing, the Real Estate Commission can impose disciplinary action for that personal transaction. What we've seen in the last decade or so is a few out of scope cases. And by out of scope cases, these are usually real estate salespersons who are committing work that they are not licensed to do. And it is most common in the area of property management. And so usually it's a real estate salesperson who has opened up a property management business on the side outside of the main brokerage firm that they're affiliated with. And they have several homeowners who are clients, and they're managing properties. Again, these are serious cases. I'm glad to report that in the ones that I have seen in the last decade or so, the principal brokers and the brokerage firm had no idea that the real estate salesperson had gone rogue. But we did see an uptick in that. And in the last couple of years, I haven't seen many complaints in that area, but they have happened. Another trend, of course, is lap license cases. Of course, every 2 years, there's the renewal period, and we typically get quite a few licensees who aren't renewing their license on time. And so it is a licensing law violation to not renew on time. And typically the principal broker, as well as the individual licensee, can be tagged for someone's failure to not renew their license on time. We have seen 1 or 2 cases in the last decade or so involving a real estate licensee who was disciplined by the Real Estate Commission, not necessarily for doing something related to a real estate transaction, but for doing something that cast the profession and individuals within the profession in a negative light. And the case that I can think of is a real estate licensee who had been convicted of theft because the person was the secretary of an outside organization and had basically embezzled all of the funds. So in matters like that, the Real Estate Commission takes very seriously. They expect licensees to be of the highest integrity and to be trustworthy. And so they did reach out and discipline that particular licensee for casting the profession in a bad light and also for engaging in dishonest conduct. And finally, in the last decade or so, we've seen an uptick in complaints from condominium owners who make requests for information of their associations, but they do not receive the information, or they do not timely receive it, or they do not receive a response period from the association. So there are provisions in the law that regulate condominium owners and what documents they are entitled to and how quickly associations need to respond to those requests, and whether or not fees can be charged and so forth. So there's a whole body of case law on that. So we have seen an uptick in cases dealing with condominium association records. I'd just like to point out now a couple of problem areas where we see licensees getting into trouble. And these are areas that I think can be easily avoided. One is not having paperwork or maintaining sloppy paperwork. And what I mean by that is if a customer or client files a Regal complaint related to a real estate transaction, whether it be property management or a sales transaction, and the first thing that the Consumer Resource Center investigator will ask for is the underlying documentation. And when the client or customer turns that information over to Rico, they don't have a fully executed copy. They just have a document with blank forms on it, no signatures or anything like that. Or on the other hand, sometimes we receive copies of documents where material terms, financial terms, who's responsible for certain obligations and so forth. Those terms are not filled out either in the property management agreement or in the lease agreement. And so that's really a no-no. It is a violation of the licensing law not to provide clients and customers with fully executed copies of agreements, and not to and for agreements not to contain material terms. And licensees have been disciplined for not being better at the paperwork that they do and provide to their customers. Another problem area that is completely avoidable is in the area of disclosing information to the commission when asked. And this is every 2 years on your renewal forms and when you're responsible for certifying your CEs. Some of the questions on there are pretty plain and simple. And so answer them and answer them truthfully. Don't rationalize that your situation doesn't fall within that particular question. Just go ahead and answer. It's better to disclose because the Real Estate Commission and Rico often finds out when someone does not answer truthfully in representations made to the Real Estate Commission. Another area that licensees have problems with, and that's completely avoidable, is failure to report to the Real Estate Commission liability decisions within 30 days. And I'll talk about this a little bit more, but there is a statute on the books that requires all licensees, not just real estate licensees, to disclose in writing to their licensing authority any adverse decision any adverse decision that has been imposed against them while practicing real estate that led to damages. And finally, in the area of property management, the problem areas that really are avoidable are failure to even have a client trust account, even though you are receiving trust funds from owners as well as renters, not using good, clear accounting practices, not providing your owners with written statements of receipts and disbursements, taking trust funds which is conversion and theft, and of course, altering or forging documentation to back up the withholding of security deposits and other sums that may be due to a renter and to the landlord. So again, these are areas that people do get into trouble that can be easily avoided by just being the best professional that you know and being honest as well. In the next couple of minutes, I'd just like to share with you a couple of compliance tips so that you can, so that we don't have the opportunity to meet you in the form of a Rico complaint that comes to my attention. And so I have a couple of simple general tips to share with you, 3 in fact. The first one is please have paperwork and keep good paperwork for the reasons I said earlier, but also for the simple reason that once a Regal complaint is filed against you, your paperwork is extremely important. The transactional paperwork is extremely important, and that could be your defense to the actual complaint. So tip number 1, keep paperwork and make sure it's good paperwork. Number 2, please renew your license and meet your CE requirements in a timely fashion. We get a lot of cases in this area every single year, and it's really easy to comply with that mandate. So renew timely, meet your CE requirements in a timely fashion. And third, when you change your address, be sure to let the Real Estate Commission know promptly. I believe the rule is that you need to make changes to the commission within 10 days. And I believe the commission does have a form specifically for that called the real estate change form, which can be obtained through their website. So whenever you change your addresses, be sure to go to the Real Estate Commission's website, look up the form, fill it out, and submit it. This is one of those areas that the Real Estate Commission staff is very picky about. So update your addresses in a timely manner. I'd like to provide a couple of tips on providing information to the Real Estate Commission. And I touched upon these tips briefly when I talked about some problem areas. Please know, if you don't already, that making a false statement to the commission is a licensing law violation. And also making misrepresentations to the commission is a licensing law violation. So be extremely careful when you are responding to anything that the commission is asking you. When you are answering questions on application or renewal forms or any type of certification that you are turning into the commission, be honest. Secondly, read and reread the forms carefully. If you are unclear about what a question is asking, please call the real estate branch, talk to a staff member so that you are clear about what is being asked so that you can honestly respond to the question. If you have a doubt about what the question is or what your answer should be, disclose the information. And finally, if the question or the form asks about prior disciplines or discipline you may have received in another state, judgments that have been entered against you, liens, including tax liens, or criminal convictions, or things of that sort, please explain if this has happened to you. Disclose it and give an explanation. You will never be penalized for over disclosing, but you can be penalized for not doing so, even though you may believe in your mind that your response doesn't fall within the scope of the question. And an example I'd like to share with you is many times we have gotten responses from licensees who answered no to the question about whether or not they had been convicted of a crime during the last renewal cycle. And when we talked to them about why they responded no, when in fact we have a record of their conviction in front of us, surprisingly, many of them say they did not know, for example, that a misdemeanor was a crime, or they thought that the question was asking only for felony convictions, or they thought that the question was only asking, for crimes where people are, in prison, incarcerated, as opposed to just spending time in a local jail. And these licensees honestly believe that their situation, their criminal conviction did not fall within the scope of that question. But of course, they're wrong. And if they only had called the real estate branch to inquire, then we would not have taken action against them for providing a false statement to the commission and making a misrepresentation. So if the form asks about potential bad acts, it is always best to disclose and explain. Another tip regarding providing information to the Real Estate Commission, I touched upon this earlier, is that every licensee has an affirmative obligation to disclose to their licensing board any adverse decision that was entered against them that found that they are liable for damages that were caused by their conduct as a professional. Many licensees aren't aware of this provision, but it is on the book, and it requires that the licensee report that adverse decision to the board in writing within 30 days. So, for example, if your tenant is suing you or your former tenant is suing you in small claims court for failure to refund their security deposit, and they get a judgment in their favor, which means you have to pay a certain amount, that is an adverse judgment. And that judgment must be reported in writing to the Real Estate Commission within 30 days of entry of that judgment. Even if you plan to appeal a judgment, you still need to report that in writing to the Real Estate Commission. And the notification has to go to the Real Estate Commission, not to Rico. And so we have had cases in the past where attorneys for licensees claim that they met the mandates of that particular law because they sent a letter to Rico reporting the judgment within 30 days. And that doesn't count. It has to go to the Real Estate Commission. Now, if Rico received a notification about that, we will certainly forward that notification to the Real Estate Commission, but that will not toll the time period. The 30 days will run, and the disclosure will have been untimely if it comes through our office. So send it directly to the Real Estate Commission in writing within 30 days of entry of the adverse decision or judgment against you. I just would like to share a couple of tips in case a Rico complaint is in fact filed against you. And the first tip that I'd like to share is that you need to report that complaint to the Real Estate Commission on your renewal application. I believe there's a question on there that asks, are there any pending disciplinary actions or complaints against you? And a Rico complaint falls within that question. So disclose it when you renew your application. If you're the subject of a Rico complaint, cooperate with the Rico investigator. And this is something that can be of benefit to you as a licensee. The Rico investigators who conduct in-depth investigations know the law really well. So sometimes, they may send you a question and answer form that is extremely targeted because they want to get to a specific issue or a specific type of evidence. But you may have information, you may have background, you may have documentation, you may have tangible evidence that sort of puts the limited transaction in context. Feel free to provide that type of information to the Rico investigator, whether they ask for it or not. If you feel like you're under pressure and you need more time, or you want to talk to an attorney about the Rico investigation, or you're just kind of stressed out about it, feel free to pick up the phone and talk to the investigator and ask for more time. They are willing to do so. Again, our job is to conduct a full and fair investigation. And so if you need more time, or you want to gather more information, or you want the Rico investigator to consider information, then feel free to put that together and provide it to them. But just cooperate with the investigator. Don't stonewall. Don't not meet deadlines because you're pressured out and you think the investigation will go away. It won't. So again, if you're feeling stressed, talk to the investigator. If you need more time, do so. If you want to provide a context or more information, feel free to do so. Again, this is your opportunity to tell us what it is that we don't know when someone files a complaint against you. Also, don't be shy about including mitigating facts in response to a Rico complaint. And by mitigating facts, I mean information that you believe will cause us to look at this matter as something that's not as serious, or it was an honest mistake, or it's just not anything that we really should be taking disciplinary action against a licensee. Or if we're leaning towards disciplinary action, it should be more lenient as opposed to stricter disciplinary action. Some examples of mitigating factors that I recall seeing in cases that I handled is, for example, the licensee, the PB basically saying that the wrongful conduct stopped, that they took corrective action and they shared the corrective action with us, that they have conducted training of their staff so that moving forward, this situation won't happen again. This is the type of information that a Rico investigator may not necessarily ask you about, because again, they are super focused on the laws and the evidence and weighing the evidence, et cetera. But feel free to provide that evidence, that information to the investigator as part of the process. And a word on providing information to the investigator. Because this is about you, this is about your reputation and your conduct, you can certainly provide the information in a disorganized fashion. You can do sort of a data dump on the investigator, but that's very challenging for an investigator to take and to digest from your perspective. So a hint that I would like to leave with you, and I hope you take to heart, is that if you are the subject of a Rico complaint and you have information that you want to share, background information, factual information, or even arguments that you feel support your position in the dispute, then provide it to the investigator, but in a very organized fashion. Okay, you can do the data dump, but again, that'll be challenging and it will take a lot of time for the investigator to work through. So why not just provide a cover letter with a detailed explanation of what happened in your version of the events? So that way you're telling your story and the investigator will have it there and can look through it and follow up with you on any questions that they may have. And finally, with regard to Rico complaints that are filed against you, many times if the complaint makes it to the legal section, understandably, licensees always tell the attorneys, okay, I'm willing to work with you on reaching a resolution, but please, please, please do not put my name and do not put this case in the real estate bulletin. And I certainly understand not wanting to have my name and my conduct in the real estate bulletin. But unfortunately, that's not a negotiable matter from Rico's perspective, because we do not have control over the real estate bulletin. That's within the purview of the Real Estate Commission. And as a matter of policy, they have decided to publish every disciplinary action that they impose. So I just thought I would let you know that you're not going to be exempted from that if the complaint results in disciplinary action. If you are disciplined by the Real Estate Commission, then I do have a couple of tips that I'd like to offer you. First and foremost, the disciplinary action will come in the form of a written final order. And the first tip is to read and understand that order fully, because failure to comply with any term of a disciplinary order can lead to the automatic revocation of your license. Automatic revocation of your license. So please take the time to read through it and make sure you understand the terms and conditions of the final order. Secondly, if you are required to pay a fine, then be sure to pay it on time, meaning have your check sent into Rico on or before the due date, because the failure to pay on time is a licensing law violation. Next, if you successfully negotiated an installment plan for paying a fine, please calendar each day that an installment is due, and please send in your payment on or before that due date, because just like an ordinary fine, installments are due when due, and the failure to pay them on time can result in the automatic revocation of your license. If the discipline requires you to take continuing education courses, please read that provision of the final order very carefully, because it often contains numerous conditions that you have to comply with, such as contact the executive officer of the Real Estate Commission within a certain time period. Discuss with them and choose with them what courses you will be taking, the time frame for completing them. And those provisions also contain who you must notify and how you must notify them once you complete the courses. So in some cases, you just have to notify the executive officer of the Real Estate Commission. In other cases, you just have to send a notification to the attorney who handled the case at Rico. And sometimes you may have to notify both. So if there is a continuing education component to a disciplinary order, be sure that you know the obligations in them and comply with them as well. And again, I'd just like to reiterate that it's very important that you understand your order, because the failure to meet the terms of them can result in the automatic revocation of your license, meaning you will not get a hearing. Your license can automatically be revoked by the commission. And finally, I have just a couple of tips related to the aftermath of a RICO complaint. And so if you were the subject of a RICO complaint and you ended up being disciplined as a result, my first tip is that you should keep that copy of the final order. The reason being is because you're going to have to report it on your next renewal cycle. Again, there's that question that asks, have you been disciplined or judgments entered against you or criminally convicted during the previous 2 years? You would answer affirmatively to that, and then you can just summarize the final order that was entered in that case. And then secondly, if you were the subject of a RICO complaint, but no disciplinary action was taken against you, then keep the final letter that you receive from either the investigator or the attorney that closed the case. Because when you renew your license, the Real Estate Commission will be asking you about any pending complaints or have any complaints been resolved, and you will have a copy of that letter that you can provide to them that shows that the complaint was resolved without any disciplinary action imposed. And that concludes my tips as well as my talk this morning. I hope it has been helpful to you. And if there is time, I would be more than happy to answer any questions that have been posted to the chat.
Great. Thank you so much, Esther. This has been so informative. We did have a couple of questions come in through the chat. Let's see here. So the first one we have is asking, does Rico oversee escrow companies?
No, we do not.
Okay. We have another question here that asks, if a complaint has been filed or issued, how long will it show on record, say when doing that online complaint history search?
That's a great question. If the complaint is pending, it will be visible as long as the complaint is pending. If no disciplinary action results from that complaint, it will disappear. If disciplinary action results from that complaint, then it will remain on the Rico portal for some period of time after compliance, but not forever. So unlike other states that will leave it up there forever, we understand that professionals can make mistakes. We understand that they comply with disciplinary orders, and we don't hold it against them for the rest of their careers. So if there is compliance, it will disappear after a reasonable amount of time. But if there is no compliance, then the final order and the fact that there has been disciplinary action taken will remain on the portal in perpetuity.
Okay, good to know. Excellent. So we did have another question asking with regards to the change form, specifically when you need to change your address. You had mentioned, I think, a 10-day response time to update. Is that 10 calendar days or business days?
Shucks, I do not know. It's been a while since I looked at the rule itself, but I can actually look it up and I can email it to you.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
If that would help, and then
Awesome.
we can get it out to the audience. So I will do that.
Great. And then do you generally recommend walking in change forms or mailing them in? Is there a preferred method? Or not really?
I think timing wise, you probably get it in within the 10 days if you actually walked it in.
Okay.
I also know that the licensing division, which is separate from Rico,
Right.
they sometimes have staffing challenges. So me personally, I would probably walk it in.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like that is all for today. I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing all of that information with us. Really great tips. So this today is the end of our program. I just wanted to thank you all for attending. I wanted to just express and have a wonderful weekend and stay safe. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.